Hello and welcome. My name is Rick Willard and I'm the founder of Agentic Group. Agentic Group, if you don't know, is a private collaboration of exponential individuals and startups and companies and even governments that are committed to finding ways through this global crisis and cultivating opportunity as a result. So to get right to it, today we're going to have what I can only describe as Oxford Debates meets Fight Club. Both Anish Mohammed and Harri Hursti are friends and they're also Agentic members. Moreover, they're luminaries in cryptography with long sheets, resumes that attest to that. You don't have to take my word for it, they're easy to look up. So to introduce them, Harri, again, Harri Hursti, is a Finnish computer programmer that's from Finland. He's the former chairman of the board and co-founder of Raman, where he supervised in the development of the world's smallest 2 gigabit traffic analysis product that was later acquired by F-Secure Corporation. Harri's likely most well known to the public for his starring role in HBO's 2006 documentary, Hacking Democracy, where he famously exploited some security flaws in the Diebold voting machines, which were considered unhackable at the time. And almost like the Titanic, right? So if Diebold was a Titanic, Harri was the iceberg. And he also has a new HBO documentary coming up. Actually, it's not coming up. It's aired in February, and it's still on HBO. March. Pardon me, March. Okay, just in time for COVID. And it's called Kill Chain: The Cyber War on America's Elections. Anish Mohammed, Dr. Anish Mohammed, and I should point that out, is also a member of Agentic, and he's a technologist with a multidisciplinary background, and he's passionate about technology, and if you ever talk to him for more than 5 minutes, you'll get more than you ever thought possible over that time. But over the years, he's been involved in architecting and building micropayment platforms, big data platforms for banks, among other things. He's worked as a researcher in security and cryptography, both in industry and academia, and has a deep expertise in blockchain and cryptography. He currently focuses on blockchain and crypto economics. Anish is also the co-founder of EthicsNet and a founder of Polygon Protocol and advisory board member of the Institute of Ethics and Emerging Technologies. Add to that he is a core advisor to the cryptocurrency and rail Ripple that many of you may know. So to get to the debate itself, we are semi-following Oxford debate rules. That means really not at all. But we want to make sure that there are 2 sides represented on the question at hand. So let's start with the resolution and resolved. Blockchains have not lived up to their value proposition. So the question is, do they have value at all? Blockchains, when we first got into this industry and we first started touting what these things can do, we focused on issues like trust and inclusion and impact and finance and a number of lofty ideals. Then came the ICO, the ICO evolution, which all technologies go through, where there's a mad gold rush to create capital momentum within the industry, which gave it a tarnished reputation. And you had entities like R3 and similar blockchain developers for banks and other enterprises sort of flaming out. And I mean, R3 now has a product that is not blockchain at all, but they started off with blockchain as their primary goal. So the question is, are blockchains valid still? And we're going to get to the bottom of that today with both Anish and Harri. So without further ado, let's get to the first question. So this question goes out to Harri. He'll have 5 minutes to answer. Based on the recent spate of lawsuits against certain blockchains, like Tether, and their founders, and I mentioned the ICO impact on the industry earlier, do blockchains really have any viable business practices that we can point to? Harri, your 5 minutes, please.
First of all, let's talk about what blockchain is. Blockchain fundamentally is a data structure. It's a linked list, and we have a linked lists everywhere. One of the first secure implementation of linked lists was inside of a Cisco router to make the internal data structures of Cisco operating system to be less hackable. Nothing to do with the storing value of any kind of other than executional parameters, which have a lifespan of living inside of the memory, usually less than 1 second. After that, completely gone, wiped, done. So when we talk about a data structure, the data structure's value is only the value of the content and the lifespan of the content needing to be existing and having an integrity so that it can fulfill its promise. The linked list inside of Cisco, where the lifespan is less than a second, has actually worked very well and stored a value for the meager time of 0.1 to 0.5 seconds on average well, and has been making hackers' life difficult. Not impossible, it has been hacked multiple times, but it has been greatly improving the security. Now, when we go from there to the macro world, where the blockchain, which is just a linked list with a cryptographic algorithm giving you the link exactly the same way as what is inside of the router, but now we are, instead of talking, this has to be viable for more than a second, saying, well, it has to be viable maybe even days, months, years. You're taking the same data structure and making in your mind an assumption that you can scale it up and you can use this technique to wildly different a purpose and wildly different kind of storage. When we look into this area where the purpose of the linked list is completely different, I have been saying that blockchain is a solution looking for a problem. It already solved one problem inside of router. It has been solving a lot of problems, a similar nature inside of operating systems, where literally the time span is seconds and the data has no monetary value. The data has a value only as an internal data structure for the operations in place. Now, what makes us to believe that the blockchain can store value in the macroeconomic systems across the internet? That, of course, comes with the trust model and anchors of trust, like shared ledger, independent validation of the chain. And again, when you go that area, you have to recognize that if you cannot validate the linked list blockchain, it doesn't have any reason. You have no reason to trust. And that is why when we look at the cryptocurrency market and we look different proposals of blockchain, the first question is, did you have blockchain in your blockchain in the first place? I have been auditing a number of blockchain companies, finding out they don't have a blockchain in their blockchain. Just a marketing term. Latest one is in other kind of value. There's a internet voting company, which has been the best funded Boston-based company in the world. They have been trying to fight a way. While they have been saying they are open, they had a bug bounty program. They got there was a bug found. They immediately changed the rules of the bug bounty and referred this guy to FBI as a hacker. Now, after that, MIT ignored their bug bounty program, took a look into their blockchain and find, okay, this blockchain doesn't have blockchain in the blockchain. So the whole blockchain was marketed. When we look at a lot of the cryptocurrencies, when we look at a lot of micropayment systems, where if you pull the hood off and you say, show me your blockchain, you find there's no blockchain, or there is a blockchain kind of structure with no anchor of trust. And the anchor of trust in this case can be technical, which I'm mainly talking about, but it also can be, like in Tether, it should be regulatory, it should be in legal side. And again, Tether has been firing their own auditors, which always a good sign, gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling of trust. So the question is, why would you trust it? And that's really the question at the end of the day. When you look at the linked list, what was the original time span of linked list compared to what we have today, why you should be trusting it. And if you cannot trust it, why would you ever think it can store value?
Thank you, Harri. Anish, your response?
Well, I probably should start with pointing out the obvious. Linked list is a linked list, and the Cisco routers and switches have been in big trouble all the time, and DNSSEC was proposed just because of this. And there is a huge difference between a blockchain and a linked list. A linked list never has the concept of distributed consensus. And this is the real difference why blockchain was born. So the problem is very simple. I'll explain it again so people really understand this. When you have a $5 note with you and you give it to somebody, that $5 disappears from your wallet to their hands. And if they spend it, it's gone from their wallet as well. And in a digital world, this is very hard to enforce. If I have a wallet and if I take a $5 note out of it, my wallet should have $5 less. And this has to be known to everybody else. Otherwise, I could actually spend this $5 with you, and I could spend the same $5 with Harry. And this is the problem that is called double spend. And the version of double spend has been a big problem. So I've been working micropayment systems way before the so-called cryptocurrencies appeared in this horizon. And this was a very big problem. And the first instance of a solution to an offline double spend problem, which was kind of acceptable to most of the people, was in Bitcoin. And that was effectively providing proof of work. So you have this ability to create a distributed consensus. And again, Harry was actually describing the challenge of trust. Yes. The question of trust is like, who do we trust? How do you trust? This is a model of trust where we trust this piece of paper and whoever else has signed this paper to actually provide us with value. And now we know what really happens in the economy, right? So in 2007, we saw what's happening, and now we are still happening. You're still seeing what's happening, the quantitative easing, right? So there is a huge problem. When you have a centralized entity that actually provides an economic instrument, you have to trust them. The alternative to this was this new mechanism by which you have a decentralized trust. So anybody who could join the network, who could actually do some work to prove they're real. Again, this is some construct that, relatively new to most people. It's like, how do you walk into a protocol and do some work and gain some reputation or gain some trust and use this trust to do transactions? And this is what blockchain has actually been doing. And as it happens, one of the first use cases we have is doing economic transactions, and that it took its time. Like the micropayment systems, I kind of said, didn't really take off. And when Bitcoin got published, it was in 2008, 2009 is when they started doing transactions. And from then on, it really started taking up. And then there were protocols that turned up with that more functionality than just having a distributed consensus. In addition to having distributed consensus, now you have the ability to prove, A, to attach data to policy by using smart contracts, and C, to prove things beyond, just this notion of a linked list. You actually have the ability of running zero-knowledge proofs on top of it. So, the notion that a simple linked list is able to do everything, and all the notion in the world has to be, ephemeral, as in like I should only last for a few seconds. That's not how the world has been working. Typically, how transactions happen is ephemeral transaction can only happen when it's barter, when two parties have, meeting wants and needs. I could actually sell you a cow and get some goats. That's when both of us have the same needs. We are on the same place and we do transactions. And this was actually, as society evolved, we actually moved to store and forward. You could actually sell a cow or a goat and then transfer it to something that's valuable, that's considered valuable. It's an interim store of value, and then do the transactions, right? And this is how society has been working. And now what cryptocurrencies are actually shown us is like we can actually have this kind of transactions with no trust, okay? And still having, a sort of a store and forward. So this is the real shift in paradigm, and it's the way things have been happening. I completely agree. There are lots of blockchain protocols that might have no blockchain protocol behind it. It's one of the challenges with marketing. It's like marketing could tell you anything they want, and there is no way on earth to actually prove to anybody that anything that marketing says is true, or the other way around, right? And then also there are problems with some protocols who fire their auditors. Look at banks. Look at the biggest banks. You might think the biggest of the banks would actually be good actors, say Goldman Sachs, they probably have paid the largest amount of fines in the world. So what does it tell you? So, if you don't trust them, do you think you can trust any of the banks?
Okay, thank you, Anish. I'm going to stop you there. Let's go to question number 2, and you'll have 7 minutes to answer this particular question. So we've established now that there are blockchains and there are blockchains with no blockchains. But since the emergence of quantum computing is on the horizon, and we know that brute force computing can actually break existing blockchains or blockchains as they exist today, then what in fact might be the future of blockchains as we envision them and the nature of trust moving forward? And I will actually go with Anish to start this one off. You have 7 minutes.
Okay. So just to give you some context, everything we currently uses public key crypto. Our phones, our credit cards, this communication, this all is really tied down to public key crypto. The public key crypto generally is classified into 2 major chunks. One is the one that actually has the difficulty in factoring very large numbers, and another one is actually finding discrete log. And the cryptocurrencies actually use a variant of this called elliptic curve discrete log problem. And what you're referring to there is this challenge that when quantum computers are around and Shor's algorithm is applied, you can actually solve these problems in linear time, okay? Now you should think about it in a bigger context. If quantum computers are there and it could actually factor things, all the banks will have to replace all the crypto algorithms. All the phones would have to, all telephone providers will have to change everything. All the military will have to change everything. Every communication on earth will have to change. Among them, crypto will have a problem, okay? So just to give you some context, there are things that's already happening that is resistant to quantum computing, right? So for example, let's take stock, right? Stocks are a branch of zero knowledge proofs that actually allow you to prove something to somebody else without revealing what you do. In the instance of stock, its security is very much based on coding theory, okay? So the set of cryptographic algorithms that are resistant to quantum compute in general includes like a set of knapsack problems, any of the problems using matrix algebra and coding theory. And the coding theory one is the closest one to stocks. So, if you look at even Ethereum has now stock-based rollups, and Ethereum on its roadmap already has this ability to update some of the algorithms to be QC resistant. So I would expect all the cryptographic algorithms in the so-called blockchain space, the moment they have this huge threat on the horizon, to be replaced, as with along other things. So, just solving one of them is not going to solve the whole problem of the world. The world has 80 trillion assets, and most of it is actually on the security that I described, the security of, factoring discrete log problems and factoring very large numbers. If we have no security tomorrow, there's no point in just securing just cryptocurrencies as such. Cryptocurrencies are not truly isolated from the rest. So if you think about a cryptocurrency, if you are listed on an exchange in that sense, you're completely exposed to the problems that happen in the traditional crypto world, a traditional financial world, okay? Which is completely exposed. I mean, think about all the banks. The banks will have absolutely no ability, and none of the banks actually have a roadmap that is published that actually says we have a list of quantum secure algorithms already in place. So you have the situation where we have blockchains on one side, where a whole bunch of them already are quantum resistant. Stock is quantum resistant, okay? And then, a bunch of them already have on their roadmap quantum resistant algorithms in place, okay? And then on the other side, we have the rest of the world, and the total amount of crypto is tiny compared to the total amount of, traditional assets. All the traditional assets are actually, using traditional, difficulty in factoring integer factorization and discrete log problems. And if that is going to be broken up, we will have a bigger problem. This is a tiny problem, and they're already thinking about it. So the larger world with the banks and the rest of the world should be focusing more on the problem rather than looking at it this way. So there you go.
Okay, you use all of your time. So Harri, it's on you.
All right. So back in 2016, two gentlemen called Filippo Vardosa and Ryan Castellucci started a conversation with a demonstration and relating math. And this is actually more important because this is leading now to crypto with a vulnerability to quantum, but there's a bigger problem underneath. And the bigger problem is that in blockchain, in the way we have blockchain, and I use now Bitcoin as one of the example, your private key is not private. What I mean with that is the reason we trust in the blockchain and what is the anchor of trust is the public ledger. Now, the public ledger itself contains information about your private key. And it is because in order for you to be able to validate your transactions, there is information relating to your public key and the used salts. And this leads into a possibility which has been now proven that the possibility is a reality, how you can use related keys to attack other private keys. What really made the problem accelerate and made it worse in Bitcoin, and these similar things have happened in other reasons, in other things than Bitcoin, was the brain wallets. And in brain wallet, what it created was extremely, brain wallet is a concept where your private key is something you can memorize. So you choose your private key and then the public key matching it will be mathematically created. Well, this created low entropy private keys, which are easy to crack. The same kind of things has happened in all of the other blockchains because of a lack of entropy. For example, using JavaScript to do your key generation. There are a number of reasons why bad keys has been seeping around. But those bad keys, which are easy to crack, when they enter into the system, they are weakening the strong keys because of the shared cryptographic material and shared by the information being part of the public ledger. So when transaction count increases, and it increases over time, what it causes is that your strong keys gets weaker because of nothing you do yourself, but because of what the other users are doing. This is a fundamental flaw in all of the public ledgers, because public ledgers which are using public key, private key infrastructure, as Anish said, that's every blockchain used here for the purpose of doing a coins or tokens. Now, we already have this problem. If we look what quantum brings into the mix, it's not really that scary because it's only giving you opportunity to gradually halving the strength. But when you combine with already existing mathematics and already existing data, which we know and understand and we get better every day, which we have in already existing blockchain, that is where the scary part starts. There was a demonstration earlier this summer in one of the security conferences where in blockchain and in Ethereum, the people who made the demonstration made a very small transaction, created a small wallet, put a little bit of money in, and we watched while the presentation goes on when the money got stolen. And that was the brand new key. Then they used an old key, which is already weakened because the key has been living on the blockchain. We are talking now the money being stolen in 3 minutes. So, and again, this is related to the weak keys. So when I look the algorithms, and by the way, I want to say that blockchain is not a protocol at all. Blockchain is a data structure. Blockchain is related to protocols like consensus algorithm and other algorithms which are used for building the properties of which we put into the big concept of blockchain. I mean, a lot of people think blockchain is automatically cryptocurrency. But when we look how to make a blockchain to be truly resilient against quantum, you basically the problem is not to go to lattice, the solution is not to go to lattice fields or algorithms, which are quantum resilient on their own, because the fundamental problem is the leakage of the secret key material through the public ledger. And unless you solve that problem, we can stop talking about quantum as anything else than accelerator of the problem, which then the real problem is in the heart of every blockchain, which is how you are able to validate the blockchain without leaking the private key material, half of the bit or 1/3 of the bit at the time, because of related key. And no blockchain in the world has solved this problem unless they get rid of the public ledger. And that's why there are companies which are doing blockchain without public ledger.
Okay. Thank you, Harri. Anish, you did not use all of your time, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes to rebut.
Yeah, so I think I should clearly explain the concept of zero knowledge proofs to the audience, so the audience understand why Harri is probably off the page. So zero knowledge proof is very simple terms. I say to you that this room just has one door and I have this ability to escape from this room without actually using this door. In this instance, I'm the prover, you are the verifier. We both stand outside and I say to you, I'm going to go inside, and you lock the door behind me. Next you see is I am outside. What you don't have is how I escape. And this clearly applies both to the keys that he's describing as a private public key in terms of verification key and proving key for zero knowledge proofs. So this notion that you are having, or most people have, about keys and how they would be attacked is sometimes not really based on a real mathematical understanding. And similarly, the significant problem we have for cryptography as a whole is this problem when you have a real quantum computer. Shor's algorithm, not Grover's algorithm. Grover's algorithm gives you a square root speed up for searching in an encrypted database. And Shor's algorithm, that's a real speed up, as in like a linear speed up. Effectively, it means like if I have a size of 3, and if I wanted to actually factor it, it takes 3 seconds. If I have a size of 5, time it takes is 5 seconds. If it's like an exponential, it will be like a product of that. That's 25 instead of 5. That's a significant difference. And this is the real challenge. And again, as I was describing, different tools for different things. And you can't actually solve the problems of the whole real world by solving a small problem in a very specific set in a blockchain sense. So there you go.
Thanks for that. And I know that this is, for many people, an extremely nerdy conversation. But I think it's important to have, and as we move together through the Agentic network, and you hear more and more of these sorts of conversations, that you'll begin to follow it. And people who are going to follow this on the internet and the video anyway, pretty much have an understanding of what's going on. So apologies if some of it's going over some of the audience's head. We can make things clear over time. So the third question is, given the fact that these first 2 questions are questioning the validity of blockchains themselves, and there are 2 very different views on what's going on with this, can the blockchain support cryptocurrencies? And if not, what forms of value might replace or augment the cryptocurrency part of it itself? Like, there are other forms of value like supply chain economics and other kinds of applications. So I'm going to throw that to Harri first.
First of all, the 2016 presentation, how you can use math to steal Bitcoin, and what shows how the 0-point proof is not working in blockchain. I put the presentation link into the chat, so you can just take and read it on your own time. There's a little bit of math, but you cannot talk about math without math. So about what blockchain is, in my opinion, good for. For example, if you have a public documents, which you need to make certain that the public documents, which might not be public today, will not be altered between the time of the document creation and the document publication. So eventually the document will become public. So now you have a public ledger which is containing information about public documents. And those public documents arguably always, if we were talking about open government, if we were talking about governance, all of that, those documents have value. The same thing, we have a history of extremely valuable documents. For example, land deeds and ownership of land in real estate. Most of the United States and most of the world, those documents are completely public documents. So hence now, instead of we are storing hashes of documents which you don't know what the documents are, you have the whole library of every document and you can validate every element of the blockchain. When you have that level of openness, then you can store value into data structure like blockchain. And we are talking in that kind of all open world, trillions of dollars, because everybody should be, by the law, knowing who owns this piece of land. You can prove it, but also anyone on the street who had nothing to do with the land can check who owns this piece of land. So I'm not against blockchain as a mechanism to store value or valuable things, but we have to understand what properties we need to have for the presentation of that value in order to have the validation side of the equation to work. A number of other things, how, for example, the consensus, when everything is open, everything's open. You have a lot less different things you have to protect. Now, when we look alternative ways of storing value, first of all, I have to remind you that the original patent and the original documentation of blockchain was from 1991, way before anybody had heard about Bitcoin. And there is a company called Surety, which has been doing blockchain-alike public notary service way before there was Bitcoin. So we have been seeing this working in certain environments. Again, every single diary of any public notary is public. That is another thing where you are storing key information where the source data is always public. The source data is something you can FOIA out, so you can request out, you can subpoena out, but usually you don't need to subpoena. I think we have to, when we start to look at a fast transaction and a high transaction count and high incremental a record counts, we have to look into what is a way we can make the validation of that to be possible without the undesirable elements of that, including the key leakage. We don't have a solution for that really. There are some very promising mathematical algorithms which are probably in the future going to be solving that. One of those algorithms and family of algorithms is called homomorphic encryption. Wonderful way of processing data, because you can, homomorphic encryption means that you can perform mathematical operations for encrypted data without decrypting it. The only problem is it is damn slow. It's very, very, very slow. And for that reason, it's in its current form not suitable for anything what it needs to be a fast and high transaction count per second or per minute. At the same time, homomorphic encryptions have another property which is very common in those, which is non-recoverability. If you have anything going wrong there, you really don't have an easy way of recovery. And of course, we all have heard the rumors that data sometimes get corrupted. I know it's fake news, but I have been seeing this happen. Data can be corrupted. So you have to know how you can recover from that. So I think it's going to be a very interesting future when we are starting to look into new ways of storing data, and especially new ways of gaining the trust to data. And getting the promise of zero knowledge proofs to actually work in the data structures and in the algorithms we use, because zero proof trust is something what we really want to have, and forward secrecy is something we have. It's the implementation which we have a problem. We don't implement the ideas and we don't implement the algorithms so that the actual implementation will fulfill the promises and properties of the algorithms we are trying to implement. It's always the problem is you have a non-discrete math and you're trying to use that. And you have the algorithms which don't directly translate to anything you can code. So you have to go jumping over a couple of hoops to make it happen. So I'm looking forward to see, hopefully in my lifetime, that we solve this problem. I don't know if we will solve this in my lifetime. And okay. I'm planning to live long.
So Harry's saying that you can store value. It's just you have to reconfigure and re-examine the nature of value. But Anish,
no, only certain kinds of value.
Certain kinds of value, thank you. Anish, you are coming from really the direct cryptocurrency side of all of this. So what's your response to that? And you do have 7 minutes. I'm sorry, Harry, I didn't tell you that to begin with, but you did time well.
Yeah, just to put things in context, Harry has been describing, time-stamping protocols. There's a huge difference between time-stamping protocols and a blockchain. Time-stamping protocol, you trust the source of time to be true, and they actually do what they're supposed to do. And this challenge, when you have a distributed time-stamping protocol, is this problem that blockchain actually solves. So pretty much what Harry is trying to saying to us is like exactly what I've been saying all the time. And literally, he's just understanding. He's in a different frame of mind, and he thinks of the world slightly differently. And I'm trying to explain. I'll give you another example. He was talking about FHEs, fully homomorphic encryptions. They are very related to MPCs, and MPCs are the basis of zero-knowledge proofs. So, for example, for snarks, we actually use MPCs, and stocks already have some MPC implications, right? So these are all very close constructs. It's just that people see it differently. The way I'm kind of describing this is, however, I have to agree with Harry on certain things. One of the things you have to agree with him is the challenge of implementation. There is no way that we can actually make sure that somebody really implements whatever they say they're implementing the right way. That's a huge gap. Starting from, say, for example, if you are thinking about like a snark, a zero knowledge, a success zero knowledge protocol that actually is being implemented, you have to take something that's actually there as a the initial agreement. You need to convert that into a QAP, and then you need to convert that into an R1CS, rank 1 constraint system, and then you actually have this zero knowledge proof which you deploy, right? And I agree again with Harry on the fact that in this instance, this, if any of the constraints are missed in this rank 1 constraint systems, the protocol is completely broken. But again, this is always a challenge. I can actually go back and I can give you examples of so many protocols that's been broken. I myself has been involved in breaking IPsec. Okay, DNSSEC is kind of tied to IPsec, and I broke it. You can find the paper in Microsoft Research homepage, right? So this is not the thing. The thing, we need to disconnect the human fallibility of implementing protocols. And I can give you another example. OpenSSL, the basis of most of what you guys have been using, the SSL that I've been talking about. How many times it has been broken? For a period in time, I was on the dev list for a while. So I know for a fact that how many times it has been broken. So there are lots of attacks that happen. Protocols is a cat and mouse game. If somebody designs a protocol, somebody else looks at it differently, and the protocol that is created breaks up, right? So now the question is, like, in a society where trust structures are dynamically changing, and we want to actually do things at a much faster rate, and at times we don't want to have humans in the loop, I can't think of a better structure than attaching policies to data. And at this moment in time, unless we can actually come up with a different trust structure, which represents a one-time, trusted time timing service, which is like distributed and still have trust and doesn't involve blockchain, it will be almost impossible for us to, enforce such a governance system. And, having a governance system is the thing that we have been alluding to all the time. So when you have data transfers and you want everybody to agree to the thing, we need to have a data, governance enforcement mechanism. And what essentially blockchains and smart contracts are allowing us to do is this ability to enforce this governance mechanism. So to me, the way I think about it is like, okay, we will have a bunch of tools to actually achieve certain characteristics. In this instance, if it's transfer of value, or if it's a question of governance, governance enforcement, or other things, where it's just a question of some data being attached to a policy and being sure that this policy is enforced irrespective of the levels of trust we have in this ecosystem. That's where I see the value of blockchain is. And this could be going to either having trade finance, so you could actually be doing microtransactions, you could have remittances, you could have securities, you can have secondary markets, all the different things that are there. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example that actually makes sense why some of these things are very important. The real meltdown that happened in 2007, that was actually having abstractions of financial products, right? So it was like if you had a AAA bond that's actually being bundled along, but the C minus, and then you call it A plus, right? This wouldn't happen if you had a zero knowledge proof attached to it. The proof would actually verify, in spite of the fact, whatever that goes inside, the fact that you are actually not complying by the rules that's been agreed. Again, I agree to Harry's challenge, right? The challenge here is like, if the rule that's being agreed to hasn't been translated the right way around, then the proof wouldn't be able to give you the assurance. But if there were such a possibility of zero knowledge proofs, and there's a verifier and a prover, and all the provers being deployed in all the banks or all the investment banks which actually produce these instruments, right? Then we wouldn't have this challenge. We would have actually known what is really happening. The rules were being broken by the zero knowledge proof would have told them, okay, even though I don't see what you're doing, literally I know for a fact that you are actually breaking the rules. And that would have been very, very useful for the society to understand, there's been a significant increase in risk. And this is how I see, things going forward. We have a whole bunch of, mechanisms that are getting online, whether it's autonomous vehicles, autonomous assets, whether it's, other secondary markets, more and more assets that are being the traditional world entering the so-called digital world. All of them would require something like this. And I see there probably is a possibility of future. Again, conditional to things, including people's ability to understand mathematics, people's ability to do what they say they're going to do, and people's ability to verify what other people say they're trying to do.
Thank you, Anish. So our last question before we go to Q&A, and you'll both have 7 minutes for this question as well, is what is the viability of using blockchain to extrude new forms of value for communities? And this can be, communities can be looked at as both physical spaces or networked environments. So you both have alluded to forms of value like documents and public documents, or initially the kinds of applications you just mentioned, trade finance, et cetera. But when we talk about not only just from a currency standpoint, but from a value extrusion standpoint, how can communities benefit from blockchain and its properties of trust, of inclusion, et cetera? And actually, I'm going to toss this right back to you, Anish, for 7 minutes.
Okay, so I'll try explain this slightly differently. What you described there to me sounds like a local currency in that sense. I should probably describe this in a different frame of reference. In general, what we need to understand is, we have an evolution of an ecosystem. Human transactions are evolving across time. And I describe barter, I describe intermediate store of value, and then in the broader sense of value transfer mechanisms. When you have a community and the community has this ability to interact, what blockchains would allow you to do is to have a very contained, secure, seamless, if you want to have open and in a sense, transparency or privacy, whichever you choose, right? Or if you want to have, some amount of validation while still preserving privacy, you could still have those things. You can actually have a fair distribution of value within an ecosystem as well. So it's like the fairness could be mathematically enforced. This is why I was describing zero knowledge proofs and other things. So we have this ability to tie things together where the value is being created. The value could be from any of the different things you described. It could be from trade finance. It could be from a local currency. So imagine a situation where you have something like a refugee camp. refugee camps are really, really challenging. So UN currently has some of these blockchain projects that actually help them, share the value and somehow allow them to get the best out of the value that they have access to, because it's like the leakage of value from this ecosystem actually decreases the total amount of value there. And in situations like refugee camps, this is super important. So situations like that will be super, the characteristics of blockchain is super helpful. What it allows you to do is you actually have the ability to see where value is coming and where value is going. And B, you have the ability to enforce that certain things can't be done, and C, the leakage, which is essentially disappearance of the value effectively, especially in corrupt environments, right? So it's like, imagine you have 100 million coming into a refugee camp, and like along the way before it ever reaches this refugee camp, like half of it might disappear into thin air, right? So all of this could be prevented if you apply blockchain principles of blockchain. And you can actually have cryptocurrencies that are useful for people. And you could also tie the identities of these people with these currencies. So there are lots of things you could actually do. And it depends on what is it that you want to do and how you want to do. What's the level of privacy you want? What's the amount of verification you want? What's the security margin you want to have? And most of this could run on a normal phone. And most phones have wallets. So if you have any of these phones which have the ability to run a wallet, you should be able to implement this and allow the people to actually have value.
Thank you, Anish. Harri, I'm guessing that you have something to say about that may be slightly contrary, so you have 7 minutes to do so, please.
We have been starting to build a next generation value creating or a critical infrastructure networks. In communication area, we have been seeing the rise of mesh networks as both in IoT networks, but also just as a public service, non-profit community-driven internet. Here in New York, we have a NY Mesh. We have a similar initiatives in almost all the big cities around the world. In order for people to participate in these community networks, a number of times using blockchain kind of mechanism to share, to give a small financial incentives for the participants to actually spend their electricity, lend their rooftops, and make the capital investment needed for equipment. This has been proposed. And there are humongous community networks. Wi-Fi is about 40,000 individual nodes run by 40,000 individual people, making that Catalonian area in Spain a network to be serving millions and millions of people, and it's a non-profit. So again, having the small donations, able to spread that money with a mechanism like blockchain has been investigated for years. It hasn't taken off. And the reason in that area is the negative properties of blockchain kind of technology. If you have a huge amount of small transactions, because in this case you actually don't have a problem of having a huge number of small devices doing the validation and being the consensus brokers. The next proposal, and I'm actually personally involved in a couple of these, is now when we are in energy generation is increasing, going to your rooftops, and we have a lot of community participation, microgrids. And again, when you look at area, you come to the same problem. You have to limit how often you make the settlement, how often you make the transactions, so that you don't break your data structure by just flooding it with a massive amount of transactions. We have to remember that in Bitcoin, back when our computers were not very fast, there was a tweak relating to the maximum size of block, which was greatly to do with the denial of service attacks against, Bitcoin network in its very infancy. We have the same unintentional denial of service in the payment mechanism happening easily when we try to implement a this kind of settlement mechanism, microtransaction settlement mechanisms, into the organically growing networks, whether it's a communication network mesh radio systems for internet, or whether it is a microgrid for selling and buying back your electricity from your rooftop. We really need to solve this problem, because if we look the future of energy, it's very hard to see how we are going to have renewables energies growing in scale without utilizing the rooftops and everything what we have already. And there's a great incentive for people to participate, but we are really right now lacking the mechanisms how to make this to scale. And in two companies in this area which I have been involved, both companies tried and failed, basically Ethereum. One of the big problems, for example, is mentioned to start the smart contracts. I don't know what kind of brain damage you have to have in order to think that it's a wise idea to make your smart contracts to be a Turing complete. I think there has to be a very funny smelling smokes involved, but absolutely not the way to do it. So we have to think about it. We have to go back to a drawing table, because we have a real world demand, which, as said, can blockchain solve it? No. We have tried and we have failed, and right now nothing in that path. There's a massive amount of money involved if you solve the problem. So there's a literally in energy area, there's trillions of dollars, and you can have a transaction fee for trillions of dollars if you solve the problem. So there's a strong incentive for everybody to figure out how to make this work. We haven't figured out how to make it work yet. But we really have to think about what is the way, how we are going to get it done, and especially taking it into account that these, if we take away the notation that this has to be a permanent storage of value, we ease the problem a lot. That's one of the things that we have to think of. What is the temporal aspect of what we are doing? What is the volume we are trying to do? And also, what is the threat matter? What are the problems we need to, what are the threat actors? What are the malicious activities we have to protect the value against? And then from those aspects, start to think about how we solve the problem. And as I said, blockchain has been tried in this area for a decade, and it has been not giving much of promise.
Okay, Harri, thank you. The takeaway that I got from what you just said, which I will never forget, is that Ethereum developers are smoking dope. That
I don't know, but the whole idea of using something looking a lot like JavaScript as your smart contract engine, from a security perspective, from flexibility, wonderful. From security, flexibility is always the enemy of security.
Okay, Anish, I have to give you 2 minutes to respond to that. I know there are a few touch points that you may want to add to, and then we're going to go to Q&A.
Sure, just to start, the whole premise of protocol design, there is a whole branch of whatever you call it, either it's a science or like a hybrid between cryptography and economics called cryptoeconomics, which is generally involved in understanding security margins, the people who are acting against you, and all the rest of the things that Harri was kind of describing. While he is describing smart contract, a specific smart contract, as being very interesting, and he might not be alone. There might be people who might join him in agreeing to how he is thinking about smart contracts. But there are other smart contracts, and the whole EVASM framework that has been there since the evolution of Solidity, the so-called ability to actually formally verify smart contracts have improved, and so has a whole bunch of other functionalities. So looking at one example and saying that that particular example describes everything, it probably is a wrong way to go about it. It is that applies to people who smoke pot as well, right? It's like there are people who smoke pot, and some of them invented some of the very interesting things. At the same time, they might not be the best people to give the most rational, well thought out, described solution to every problem on earth. So we shouldn't mix the two together. As I said, look at cryptoeconomics to understand how people in the world who actually build blockchain protocol think about this, and understand how they think through all these problems. There's actually a conference at MIT, and actually MIT just produced like proceedings from last year, and there was another one this year. Listen to that, understand other people around the world who are cryptographers actually think about this, and at the same time, look at EVASM, look at how smart contracts are moved on, and how much changes actually happen in a smart contract world before we completely put everything into one basket.
Okay, well, thank you both. I mean, this has been fascinating. I'm going to, before we do Q&A, I'm going to just say that it seems like it is resolved that blockchains do actually have value. The nature of that value seems to be still under contention. And that is maybe the subject of another debate down the line. But I want to thank you both for your viewpoints. I think we could have gone on for several hours and still wound up at the same place. And also, I'm going to call this an unqualified draw. Now, and I mean unqualified, and I'm saying that on purpose. But we have a few questions that I'd like to get to, and I'm going to read them from the chat. The first is from Annie. And that, I think this is a great question. What you've mentioned here is more about human factors like trust, and Harri is basically saying garbage in, garbage out. If how can you trust the input of someone's information, and does that have value if it's incorrect information? He did touch on that. But Annie wants to know, as she says, this is a great debate. Thank you, Annie. But it's all about software and what's out there. What about the hardware situation globally? That's what she wants to know. What kind of hardware is supporting these applications? And does that, we touched on that with quantum, but what maybe specifically might be out there that's being used right now to move the blockchain conversation and code forward? I'll go to Harri for that first.
First of all, hardware is the new software, in very many different ways. The easiest way to think about this is that we today have everywhere when we have a circuit board, the circuit board has embedded software, usually called firmware or similar term, which is running on operating system and everything on that hardware. But when we go to the SoC and CPU area, system on chip, then we have inside of that environment another layer of software, which is usually called something like microcode. If we look at custom chips, I don't even talk about FPGAs, which are completely, FPGAs are feed programmable. So it's basically build your own chip on the field by programming gates. It's a gate array. But if we look ASICs, so custom chips, all of that are today developed by using a programming language kind of descriptions. So you're basically programming and letting the chip design software to turn that software into a chip implementation. So, and that's another whole ball of wax, how unintentionally, without no malicious activity, you have created hardware to be the new software with all the negative properties of the software inherited from software to the hardware. Now, hardware itself has its own negative and positive properties, but a lot of negative properties. And that's why physical security is so important with hardware. That's why you have a number of things from side channel and tempest to power glitching. You can actually trick the chip to jump over instructions by manipulating the operating power. It's called power glitching. We have been doing it for a long time, making your system to say the passcode is okay when it's not, by just glitching the power supply. There are a number of other things there. So we really are in the place where hardware should be more vigorously audited than software. And inherently, we should trust the hardware less than software, because the hardware has inherited in this current world everything bad from software, and then it has its own set of problems. Furthermore, if we look specifically in the area of blockchain money things, first of all, we all know how many completely fraudulent scam hyper condensator wallet thingies has been getting money and actually being a big trade shows why their whole product. If you have any idea of hardware, you know this product will never exist. It's not. This is only for scamming purposes. Mm-hmm. But also, if you look the other way, I said I was auditing the blockchain companies. I found 7 different blockchain chips, all coming from Ukraine or Belarus on that area. Seems to be a lot of innovation in that area. And again, one of the properties of hardware, it is the legal protections it has because it's a physical product. So all of these things are actually not only auditing hardware is harder, but there's additional layer of legalities which are used in this environment to make certain that security researchers won't be able to take a look and validate what's going on. So again, if you have something which you inherently shouldn't trust, and then the lawyers of the company say, stop looking, that's a warning sign for me.
If I remember correctly, Harry, that number one, that's fascinating for the first thing. But number two, I think, wasn't your Diebold hack in 2006 on the chip level?
Basically, both of my Diebold hacks were on chip level. And interestingly enough, from the second system, which we have been all looking over 10 years, and we thought we understand this system very, very well. Year and a half ago, we found out there was a hidden subsystem hidden on the circuit board. So when we got another pair of eyes with another background, this guy had tools which are not commonly available. He was able to do a reballing of the chips and talk with the chips directly, and found a completely hidden subsystem which can change everything, which was painstakingly embedded in the circuit board. So that was actually mind-blowing to me, because we and a lot of universities from Princeton to University of Michigan, we all have been staring on that circuit board. We all have found so much bad in that circuit board, and still it had at least one more thing waiting to be discovered after a decade of very careful taking a look. So yes, hardware is a wonderful place to hide things.
Anish, please respond.
I have to agree with Harry on this. Hardware is incredibly hard to verify. So, there's a bit of a context to this. So you need to understand the whole world depends on hardware. There are like 4 major fab labs that actually manufacture all the CPUs in the world. And while we think about the, size of this transistors going down, we are right now in the 7 nanometer space. And there are some 4 that's actually out there. So literally what happens is, like, even if you give them the VLSI design for these guys, they can actually embed things inside, which is exactly what Harry was describing. You could actually have incredibly hard challenges. If something is embedded inside your VLSI design, if it's in a normal form factor, as in like you get a chipset, like any of the chips I have over here, I mean, I don't have any of them open over here, but if you find one of them, the thing is, like, even if you use a JTAG and try to analyze it, you won't be able to understand what's going on inside. You could actually, hide this inside PCBs. It's like between the layers. You would never even see it exist, and it will only be activated. You can actually have conditional statements inside. So it's an incredibly hard thing. It is in no way kind of, how could I say, making our world easier. The geopolitical situation actually, makes it much more harder to verify this as well. So it's a multi-level problem. Even though there have been a whole bunch of tools that allow verification of designs, but the translation, this is what I was describing. Harry was describing how things are being built. The same thing applies. What you say about blockchains applies to definition of building of hardware. You can give you a design of a hardware, this is what it is, but when it's actually being built, what's inside, we have no ability to verify.
I want to make a quick comment. So we all know Raspberry Pi. And so Raspberry Pi is an open hardware platform with open source software. And everybody can take the blueprint of Raspberry Pi from Raspberry Foundation and make your own Raspberries. You can manufacture themselves. Now, that for a long time thought that, well, this is a trustworthy platform until we realize it's not. And the reason is very simple. The Raspberry Pi main processor, which is ARM, everybody knows it's ARM CPU, it's not exactly what it seemed to be. It's a SoC where you have the GPU and the ARM cores all in the same chip. And it was found out that the way this system works is that it boots up the graphics processor first. And the graphics processor is running secret code to initialize everything else. So actually, nobody can audit it until you can audit the code, which is starting the graphics processor, which is setting up everything before the main processor gets its job. Which means also you can audit everything running in the main processor all day long, but the budding is in the basement. And if you don't know what the blob is doing, you're dead in the water from a security perspective.
Okay. Pardon me. Our next question, excuse me, is from JD. And it's, as he puts it, it's not so much a question as a request. He'd be extremely interested to hear more from both of you about the utility of blockchain for the possibility of censor/tamper-proofing documents of importance. Now, Harri, you touched on this in terms of the display and accessibility of documents, but you didn't mention anything about tamper-proofing them through blockchains. So I'll throw that to Anish first, since you just finished, Harri, and then we'll follow up with you, Harri, to talk about that.
So, you know, the question of tamper evidence is pretty straightforward. This is more to do with the security model, like in the trust model. So if you actually trust a particular blockchain and the security margin of a blockchain is higher than the actors which are malicious. So, you know, I'm assuming the question is about, you know, if you have a nation state actor, which is the adversary, and you have a document that you need to publish, either privately or publicly, and you want to prove that the document that's being published is verifiable. I mean, literally all the tools I described are the way to do it. So you understand the security margin by using the things I described in cryptoeconomics. Then I would probably use, if I want to privately publish this, I would use zero-knowledge proofs. So I have a prover and I verify, anybody can actually verify what I published is actually true, even though they don't know what it is. When they get hold of this particular document, they clearly know that this thing has been tampered. So it is very possible to do this. Then the question is all about trust and, like, you know, are the nation state actors able to influence enough of entities in the world? So as with all things, I should admit, blockchain protocols, like with other things, have the challenge of quora, as in like quorum. It's like if you have like 51%, more than 51% of the entities compromised, you know, the same thing will happen to blockchain as with anything else. And all protocols pretty much are, you know, not resistant to this kind of attacks. So that's there. Assuming these conditions, you could definitely have, you know, tamper evidence. You could also provide assurance to people that the thing has been published. They can even provide privacy to the people who publish this. You're on mute, Rick.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. So there's one more comment, though, that bears, or that's loaded with a couple of questions from Norman. And it's a little long, so what I want to do instead of reading it is I'm going to unmute and unmask Norman. And Norman, if it's okay with you, I'm going to have you ask, or rather state this directly for our last comments from both Harri and Anish. And Harri, we'll start it off with your response. So let me get his video up here.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay, well, what's up with the video? Okay, there we go.
Yeah. So a colleague of mine and I, Sam Nathans, who Rick knows, have been working on the area of digitizing legal contracts. So that has essentially, you know, been the premise upon which, you know, counterparty relationships are driven to the point of being able to embed in the legal entities the areas that, you know, are seldom dealt with, which deal with the identity and the legal jurisdiction of the groups or the people looking to interact. So, you know, the question is, you know, how could, you know, as we've seen, you know, Ethereum fails at this. So how can we evaluate digital processes in a way where, you know, you can have digitally accessible methods of enforcement?
Harri, you're up with that.
So first of all, I would like to touch the document issue. We have a proven ways which are way older than the idea of blockchain, how we can make tamper evident documents, how we can do all of that. Like my good friend, Professor Matt Place, who is Professor of Law and Computer Science in Georgetown, Washington, always says and points out, most of the applications which we propose blockchain have been solved before blockchain, and we have a proven ways of doing it without blockchain. Blockchain is just adding the value for getting money from VC, but doesn't add a value for that. And the other part is what is the benefit of tamper evident? Tamper evident is very good if you have a nuclear weapon and you see somebody has been tampering with that. You probably want to take that to store and rip it out open and figure out, or, you know, start an investigation. But when you're looking at digital document, what happens if your tamper seal is broken? How you recover from it? And if the answer is you cannot recover, maybe you should think something better than tamper evident, because you have to have a recovery mechanism. How will you remedy? What is the remedy if that has happened? And again, we have a lot of algorithms providing you remedy, how you can restore from the broken trust of tamper. And then when it comes to the smart contracts, the current idea of smart contracts, the whole execution model is it's a big question. How we can solve the execution model of the contract. First of all, as I mentioned before, having a Turing complete a virtual machine running a execution is it's a very flexible, but if you want to have something secure, you probably don't want to do it. But the second part is how you validate the execution environment and the virtual machine executing that. And this is an area of a lot of study. There is, in the side of hardware, there has been almost 20 years now a DARPA project, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency project, which has been partly running on SRI, Stanford Research Institute, which is a wonderful research institute mainly serving classified work. We have been spending 20 years to try to figure this out. Nobody is claiming this problem has been solved. Right now, last year we had in DEF CON the latest iteration of one part of this to be presented publicly first time. That project is not going to be ever producing something which is the end product. It's just a one step of the progress. The people who are running the project are very vocal and very open about it. This is a high risk, high reward program, which is intended to validate certain sub solutions for that problem. Okay. So again, if we look from the idea of how you can make a smart contract programming, if you may, which could be trusted more, we have developed now high assurance programming languages. And by the way, now means 20 years ago. COG was, for example, developed originally over 20 years ago in France. So these are programming languages which provide you a mathematical proof that the program is what program is doing. So we have a building blocks to do way better than we are doing today. And the building blocks, how we can do way better than today, have been invented 20 years ago. Nobody has been starting to implement those already existing building blocks into something which could be used in the real world today. And there's clearly, as I said, we can do way better than we are doing today if there would be an interest and money to run a project to just take what we already have and build a digitalized contract engine for real world applications of smart contracts. But nobody has been doing that.
Okay, Anish, then your response will be the last comment of the day.
Sure. I have to probably disagree with Harry. Firstly, I published a paper using cluster computing like probably more than 10 years ago. So, people in this world, or in the blockchain world, know this. In fact, Enigma actually uses some of this trusted execution environment systems, which is what he's referring to, which is like you verify a whole bunch of things. In fact, one of the things he was talking about in some piece of code existing in ARM could be actually verified if you really wanted to, if you actually had a TPM and a verification process in place. And then the other part I wanted to say about is like formal verification. Again, formal verification is very much used by lots of people. I used to work for Luca Cardoli, and he was the guy who began OCaml. I was on the VoteFat join. They have formal verification. They are not the only one in the blockchain space who actually do formal verification. So a lot of these things is already happening. It's just that, in many ways, it's a new ecosystem. A lot of the people, I wish there were lots of copies of Harri lying around, so we could distribute a few of them in the blockchain ecosystem too. So literally what has happened is like, there are people who are coming into this ecosystem, they try to build things, and sometimes they pick the wrong set of tools. And sometimes I am more optimistic because most recently between Dfinity and Algorand, half of IBM Albert and research have been partitioned away. So these are the people who actually, built and created a lot of the tools we have right now. So I am hopeful a lot of this evolution of this security tool set and the verification tool set that will happen in the next 10 years will be coming in the blockchain space.
Okay, well, thank you, Anish. We're a little bit over, but basically right on time. This is our first debate. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I think it was everything that I thought it was going to be, some contention, but a lot of respect and some mutuality, which I also thought would occur. That being said, you want to follow Harri, watch Kill Chain, watch Hacking Democracy, follow Anish. He is a prolific writer of essays and papers. You should be aware of that. Harri, our very first Agentic podcast is coming out later this week, featuring Harri, and he'll be speaking about e-voting and not only his experiences in e-voting, but also a pretty comprehensive history of voting in and of itself in America, which I found fascinating. So watch out for that coming on the network, free for members first, and then out into the wild after that. Again, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for your questions, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks with the next Agentic debate. Take care.